Everyone has the dream of traveling the world, but for enthusiasts, that means riding the roller coasters of the globe. And I've been very fortunate to be able to travel. And even though most of my international travel isn't purely for roller coasters, I still visit any major parks in the area. And when I heard I might be traveling to Australia this summer, I couldn't pass up the chance to get on some super rare, but also highly regarded roller coasters. These parks are super out of the way though, and I'll talk more about this. But let's just say it's very time consuming and very expensive to visit, even more than just visiting Australia on its own. In today's video, I'm going to talk about my experiences with the roller coasters of Australia, and why you should absolutely not visit the country if roller coasters are even part of the reason you are going. They low-key suck. Australia is one of those countries that just seems so obscure, and that's because it is. Home to less than 30 million people and over a 15-hour flight from anywhere in America and even further from Europe. A strangely large country that's also sometimes a continent and home to some wild creatures, but also a very sophisticated group of cities, most notably Sydney and Melbourne. I was going to Australia for these cities, as well as the incredible surf, but I couldn't pass up riding the coasters. But if you know anything about the geography of the parks in this place, you can imagine my horror when I checked where they were on Google Maps. The most notable parks here are undeniably Dreamworld and Warner Brothers Movie World. The good news is these parks are literally 10 minutes away from each other and off the exact same highway. The bad news is that nope, the parks aren't in Sydney or Melbourne or anywhere even near. They are up north, an hour away from Brisbane, in a city called Gold Coast. This is a 2-hour flight from Sydney, but we were able to make this work because of some excellent surf spots in the area, and it'd also be a good time to work out the wild jet lag. Anyway, I flew direct from Los Angeles to Brisbane, and then drove the hour to the Gold Coast, and this place is undeniably gorgeous. Kinda similar to Florida with the tall buildings along the beach. Nice hotels at reasonable prices here are kinda hard to come by, but we found a Crowne Plaza, which is roughly 20 minutes away from the parks. I really hadn't done much planning for the parks up to this point. Both have only a few coasters I would actually want to ride, so I thought I could get them done in one day, and on paper it made sense, but reality was completely different. The prices here are completely out of control. You have to be used to ridiculous prices as an enthusiast, but this was different. A single ticket was $100 per park. Keep in mind, these are no-seater points. They literally have one good coaster each. So I was about to pay $100 for one roller coaster. Infuriating. I ended up just totally ditching Dreamworld, but I'll get to that later. Anyway, I basically found this out the day I was supposed to be going, but you don't fly to Australia to penny pinch, so I headed to Warner Bros. Movie World. First impression of this park was honestly underwhelming. Usually parks are bigger than you might expect, and this thing is right off the freeway, but wow, it looked small. Sure, DC Rivals was tall, I guess, but it honestly looked more like some roadside park than a real legit theme park. Anyway, I parked in some dirt lot and walked to the park. It was clear from the beginning the crowds were going to be absolutely insane, which I had not expected at all. It was winter, in an area pretty far away from any major city, so when I saw hordes of people headed for the entrance just as the park was opening, I was pretty shocked. Anyway, entrance was smooth-ish. I bought my ticket at the park and headed straight for Superman, an intimate accelerator. My first realization was that this park was ridiculously small. I mean land-wise. My home park is Magic Mountain, and this is pretty much the opposite of that. The line for Superman says 75 minutes on the digital sign outside the queue, and this was just before opening. It ended up being about 50 minutes, and this ride was better than I expected, but I don't really know what I expected. I got a second row ride, which was sort of lifted over the front row, so I got a pretty good view. The launch is very intense, and the top hat provides good airtime. The rest of the ride is kinda bland, but I'm glad it's there, otherwise this coaster would be super underwhelming. Spoiler, it's the only ride I got on this, but that's mostly because of the lines, honestly. It was kinda fun. Next up was the most critically acclaimed coaster in the whole country, DC Rivals Hypercoaster. The amount of hype around this coaster is absolutely ridiculous, and people are constantly speculating if any US park will ever add something like this. It's literally a 2-minute walk from Superman, but these were shoulder-to-shoulder crowds. The line was 2 hours long, so I gave in and bought 2 skip the line passes for $80. There was even another separate pass to ride in the back, which was another $50, but I was already frustrated enough with the wild prices, so I just stuck with my 2 rides. These passes are also on the super annoying app, and there was very little internet in the park, so this thing took ages to download. Anyway, this coaster has semi-okay theming, and the queue is average at best. I took my first ride in row 4 after being brutally forced to sit there. I'll just cut straight to the chase. This coaster is straight up underwhelming. I got 1 front row ride after, which was definitely better, but this thing doesn't even make my top 10. Let's start with what's good about it. The ride is very long, and the airtime hills all give strong airtime. The restraints also don't come down hard during the ride, which is good. Now, let's talk about what's not super great about this thing. First of all, it's not super smooth, like you might expect, but the real problem is that there's really nothing really great about this. It's just kind of an average coaster. No personality, not particularly intense, and doesn't really excel in really anything, to be honest. The speed is okay, but it doesn't do anything the best or anywhere near. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Mach is just not a great manufacturer, with the exception of their spinners, but otherwise, their sit-down coasters are just not great. Safe to say, I was somewhat disappointed. This is a fun ride, but nowhere near the hype. I was going to head to Green Lantern, but the line was inhumanely long. I don't want to splurge for another fast pass for that ride, which I basically rode in Vegas. I left the park a couple hours later and a couple $100 down. Brief summary of this place. Small, crowded, expensive, slightly above average rides, but overall underwhelming. Now is when I was planning on hitting Dreamworld, but honestly, I didn't enjoy my time at Warner Brothers at all. Plus, the sun was starting to come out, and the sun in Australia just hits different. I drove by Dreamworld from the hotel to the airport, and the only interesting ride there, Steel Taipan, looked kind of small and pathetic, especially next to Warner Brothers. I didn't feel like forking over another $100 for another mock sit-down that I already knew was going to be just okay, and with a massive line. Plus, I had much better things to do, like ride some world-class waves at the beaches, and with roller coasters plentiful in Los Angeles, but good waves not, I surrendered and hit the beach. Moving on. I flew to Sydney, where the Luna Park there was pleasantly nice. The parks in the Gold Coast felt crowded and chaotic, but not in a good way, while this place had good vibes all over, with definitely more of a city crowd, which I prefer. Sydney has to be one of the greatest cities on earth, and this park is part of its centerpiece, along with the Downtown Harbor Bridge and the Opera House. It definitely feels like a boardwalk park, but not in a sketchy way. The prices here were a bit more reasonable, $60 or like $45 US for unlimited rides. I rode Big Dipper twice, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I was able to get front row both rides, and while it's a bit rough, the intensity of the launches and the ride in general took me completely by surprise. To be honest, I think this might be the best roller coaster in Australia, considering the coaster's incredible backdrop and location. My only real complaint with this thing is that it's a pretty short ride, but it's squeezed into a really small plot, so I guess that's understandable. I left satisfied with my 2 rides and walked out to see a beautiful view of the Opera House. Also, there wasn't scorching heat, which definitely helped improve the experience. Anyway, to wrap things up, the bigger parks in the Gold Coast just aren't worth your time, and if you're an enthusiast and have no side motives like surfing, honestly, don't even come to Australia. It's a beautiful country, somewhat similar to Canada, but maybe a bit better in my opinion. If you happen to be visiting by chance, you're likely going to Sydney, so I just hit Big Dipper and appreciate the city. In the end, the main reason for this trip wasn't just for the coasters, but I'm glad I got to experience them, but it's definitely not worth the 15-hour flight and the money associated with it just for the coasters. That's my final take. I feel like because so few people have been, the coasters here have some sort of mythical status, but that's not true at all. Anyway, if you have been or are considering visiting, or just want to share your thoughts, let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching, and please consider subscribing. I will see you all in the next video.